Hi, Gary Zacharias here with the Apologist bookshelf. Last podcast, I had started in on a chapter from Stephen Driscoll's book called Made in Our Image. It's dealing with the Christian view of artificial intelligence and how we can react to it and what we should be thinking about it. And so I was halfway through a chapter 3 called Identity Implosion, and it's focused on creation and artificial intelligence. So I just wanted to remind you of what the big picture is in this book. It said it was going to think about artificial intelligence through a very simple Christian framework. And here it is, 4 things. And the book carries through with that. It's very good to follow the guidelines here. Creation, sin, the cross of Jesus, the new creation. So it's kind of happening in order, and each one speaks about artificial intelligence. So here we go. This is chapter 3. It's starting to deal with creation and artificial intelligence. And so background real quickly is that Darwin came along. This is the podcast that I did last time, but Darwin came along and supposedly explained the mystery of how we all came about. Artificial intelligence says takes away the mystery of creation. It's just another natural outcome. And he's saying, the computers are going to get better and better and better. And what's that going to do to our sense of dignity? He said we're going to be smarter than dolphins, but dumber than our phones. But he said, and this is the part that I found so interesting because it ties in with J. Warner Wallace's book that was The Truth and True Crime, dealing with identity as being such an important part of what we value these days. And it's at the top of the list of our modern issues. Identity, identity, identity. Who are you at the core of your being? And it said the world is saying there's an identity the world pushes on you, and then there's the identity that you discover down deep. And where do you go for your identity? Go deep. And he said, but the problem is if you're an accident of the universe, as the atheist would tell you, then where's your identity? Where are you going to get your understanding of yourself? But he says Christianity offers a tremendous foundation for identity. And he goes back to Genesis 1 to show that we're created in the image of God. And more than that, we're special, right? We're like God in some way, but more than that, as far as our creation goes, that we're also been given the right to have dominion. So I think that's really powerful. So identity flows from God, he said in the chapter that I started last time, not from within, right? So let's pick up in the second half of this. I ended by telling the story about the French Revolution and Louis XVI being executed, and the king's son was the rightful king of France, but he lived in just terrible conditions and poverty. He looked like a beggar. And he said, that's us, right? Except our poverty is self-inflicted. We're made in the image of God. We were set up to rule the universe, and we're living in terrible conditions. We don't realize who we are. Okay, so here comes the next section to the book. It's called Competing Sources of Identity. And he talks about a sociologist, Philip Reif, who says we're entering an age he calls psychological man. He says that's different than what people used to be in previous ages. There was political man, going back to Greece, religious man, that was in the Middle Ages, and then the Industrial Revolution, we had economic man. But now he says it's the age of psychological man. So what are we talking about there? That today people are trying to seek their identity in the inward quest, right? Going within to have personal psychological happiness. So we don't receive an identity from our society. We have to find it. And we have to establish it. And he said, it seems pretty difficult, doesn't it? He says it's so different than Christianity. We don't look inwards as Christians to find our deepest identity, but we don't look to politics. We don't look to religious rituals. We also don't look to economics. They missed the mark. And he said, think about Germany in the 30s and 40s. They were outward-looking and nation-focused. And boy, how'd that turn out? Not so good. He said, don't look to society for identity. We shouldn't be looking inwards. We should look beyond society, he says, beyond our politics, beyond our religious rituals, beyond our economic function. Who do we look to? God. God made the world. He says, if you have your identity from God, that makes you resilient. Why? Well, even if society rejects you, you still have your identity. Even if you're not happy all the time, you still have that identity. You've built your identity on a rock, not sand. And of course, Wallace says the same thing in his book, The Truth and True Crime, that money can be taken away, spouse and friends can be taken away, our jobs can be taken away. All these things can be taken away, but if we have our identity from God, it's not wrapped up in the name on the office door. It's not wrapped up in our check that we get every month. We have an identity, and it's powerful, and it's strong. And so let's skip ahead here a little bit. So he said identity comes from God, not from within. And he said the good news is that when we submit to God and receive that identity, we get something way more joyful and profound than anything we could create. Next section, he talks about new covenant identity. He said, what does the New Testament say about the image of God? Well, in 1 Corinthians 11:7, it says we are made in God's image. That's the only New Testament passage that says that. It says the New Testament spends a lot more time telling us that Jesus is in God's image. 2 Corinthians, right? Look in 2 Corinthians 4:4 or Colossians 1:15. And we're being conformed more and more to be like his image. Romans 8:29, 1 Corinthians 15:49. And we're being conformed into God's image. That's 2 Corinthians 3:18 and Colossians 3:10. So Genesis emphasizes we are in the image of God, but then these later passages in the New Testament says, yes, but it's an ongoing process. We're being transformed into the image of God. So kind of a dual thing there, huh? He says even in the New Testament, humanity is made in the image of God, but the emphasis has shifted. We are an image, but we need restoration. Remember that story of that king, the son of the king. He needed restoration. It never happened for him, but we need restoration, and that's the exciting part of us, right? Our nature is broken right now. It's fallen, it's sinful, it's mortal. It needs to be renewed and renovated into something that's fixed, something that's exalted and righteous and eternal and spiritual. He says, Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 15, as was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. So he says we're dust people. We're sand people of the universe. And God's promise is that we're going to be made of something more durable. We're going to escape this delay and the corruption and this current time period that's made us into something less than we should be. So he says those are two anchor points as we think about identity, both what we are, right? So what we are right now, and what we are going to be, what we are being made to be. We're God's children, but we're undergoing renovation and rebirth and resurrection. So we're on our way, which is really powerful, isn't it? He says, I like this. He said there's another remarkable fact about the New Testament treatment of identity. It makes us think of new ways that we are in the image of God, right? So he says Christians are a new creation, a temple of the Holy Spirit. We're adopted sons of God. We're God's fellow workers. We're blessed with every spiritual blessing. We're God's chosen people, his special possession. We're holy and blameless. We're loved by God. We're seated in heaven with Christ. He said we could go on. Christians don't just have one or two identities, one or two anchors for our identity. Dozens of other truths, like those I just rattled off, that distinguish us from the creation. And by the way, let me stop here at this point. I'm tossing a lot of verses at you, and I didn't even mention the verses that tell that we're new creations and we're temples, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want those verses, let me know. Just email me, gary.zacharias@gmail.com, and I'll send you those. So he says, the bottom line, he said, we are not in danger of losing our identity. It doesn't just come from how smart we are or our moral performance or our jobs or physical capability. He said, our identity is anchored, he said, by dozens of unbreakable chains. Isn't that great? But he says, we're also anchored with each other to serve, to love Christian brothers and sisters. But he said, the unbelievers of this world don't have these chains. these chains. For some, there's only one or two things that distinguish them, and here's the catch. Think about artificial intelligence. As we get smarter and wiser and more creative artificial intelligence, those final anchors that people are hanging on to, well, I'm smarter than any other animal, I'm smarter than anything else on this planet, well, not true anymore. He says that may unmoor us from our identities. We find out we're not special, at least in that worldview, the atheist worldview. We're really not that important. Along comes an intelligent machine. It might really outvalue us. There's an Australian atheist philosopher, Peter Singer. He says, it sounds odd to call an animal a person, but this may be no more than a symptom of our habit of keeping our own species sharply separated from others. What we are really asking is whether any non-human animals are rational and self-conscious being, aware of themselves as distinct entities with a past and a future. So there's the question that's going on there. He said, we are ending up with rational programs, and more rational than we are, like ChatGPT. He says it's aware of its own existence. Now, I'm not sure about that. I'm going to let him have that one because it's his book. But I think self-awareness is out of the range of computers, but I don't know. He says it's certainly less aware than a human. So he doesn't want to get into all of that, but I think that's quite a statement. He said, but what's going on, if you're an atheist, humanity is finding itself facing something terrible. It's a demotion. An atheist philosopher and an AI researcher titled a recent book about artificial intelligence, Life 3.0. What are we? Humans are Life 2.0. We're above simple animals, but artificial intelligence is 3.0, right? It's unrestricted by anything, able to just barge ahead. So the Christian is prepared for this, right? We have our anchors, and they're going to hold. Christianity doesn't say, be whatever you want to be. It says, be what you are. So live out that identity God's created for you in creation and in Christ. And that identity is greater than anything you could make. He said, you might be a Christian who says, well, I'm a Christian mom, or I'm a Christian worker. Yeah, okay. He said, Christians have more than one identity, but there's a foundational identity because of who we are in Christ. He finishes with a couple of stories here that I think are really good. He says, there's a boy called Peter. This is a true story. He lived in a normal house. His family drove a normal car. They ate at McDonald's. He asked his dad, what do you do for your job? His dad said, I work in securities. So he thought his dad was a security guard. So he said, you could imagine this kid trying to feel special at school because his life didn't look very different than anybody else's. Okay, well, here's the punchline to the story. His dad was named Warren, and his last name was Buffett. Warren Buffett was an amazing investor in this country. His company, Berkshire Hathaway, is worth almost $1 trillion, billions and billions. So here are the kids. They didn't know who they really were. When they grew up, of course, their dad gave them some money. But it says we miss, as Christians, we're sometimes missing the reality of who and what we really are. He says the invention of artificial intelligence for us as Christians doesn't threaten our fundamental identities. Yeah, you could get a smart computer, you could get a creative computer, but we're God's children, right? What's a computer? It's glorified silicon. Here's the second story. I like this one a lot. A girl named Ayaan is born in Somalia, grows up in Africa. She gets involved with the Muslim Brotherhood. She starts cursing Jews, wearing a burqa, and she got in a bad marriage. She left, claimed asylum in the Netherlands. She read a bunch of atheists. And she was upset at Islam when she read about the attacks in New York City on September 11th. She renounced Islam and began calling herself an atheist. And started being on Dutch TV and books. But there were a lot of death threats that followed her because she'd given up on Islam. In 2005, Time named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. She was part of that new atheist group, with people like Hitchens and Dawkins and Harris. Excuse me. And she actually toured with them. But in November 2023, she announced she'd become a Christian. Wow. Why? Well, in an article, here's what she said. I also turned to Christianity because I ultimately found life without any spiritual solace unendurable. Indeed, very nearly self-destructive. Atheism failed to answer a simple question. What's the meaning and purpose of life? Christianity has it all. So the author here, Driscoll, is saying, if you have a strong identity, you have a purpose. Without a strong identity, it's kind of hard to answer questions like, what's the meaning and purpose of life? Why am I here? Artificial intelligence just talks about that question, but doesn't have an answer. Christianity does have it all. So I think that's really good to know. All right, at the very end of the chapter, he said he wants to wrestle with, am I my brain? Right? Is there something called mind? If we built your brain, would we have built your mind? He says we are building things with AI that resemble human brains at a rough level. Do they have minds? Are they conscious? He says, I predict that the process of building synthetic brains will, over time, they're going to convince more people our brains are just machines, right? We're just meat machines. We're just blood and neurons and chemicals and things firing up there. And we're just machines. And artificial intelligence will be kind of an evangelist, he says, for the mechanical view of the world. Yeah, that's pretty scary. But he said, it says, we are a creation of God. He's back to that again. He said, we're made of two things. He said, we're made of dust from the ground, all right? So we're made from creation, but God breathes into us. So there's a second part of us that we're made of two things, not just one. There is the physical part. And he said, but there's the supernatural or spiritual side that comes from God. So we got those two things. He said, we see that dualism in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes 12:7 says, the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So there's that dualism. We see that dividing death into two acts. So he said, we're building synthetic brains. Well, that's the dust side of creation. But he said, no technological progress is going to allow us to put spirit into our machines, right? Like God did for us. So he said, for him, that puts artificial intelligence more in the category of he calls it a smart calculator than a person. He said, even the most intelligent machine has something lacking. He said, machines are the opposite of God. They have physicality, but no spirit. God is spirit without physicality. So he said the doctrine of creation, right, the Christian view, encourages him to take his body and his brain seriously, but to see himself as more than just a body and a brain. And he said, I should be valuing people whose brains or bodies are broken. He said it even connects me to people long dead. The bodies have returned to the earth, but their spirits are waiting for a new creation. Wow, that's good. He said, this prepares me for a world of intelligent computers, to face dust that's more and more refined. It's smarter and smarter dust. But he said, I know that computers lack the thing that makes us so special. They lack the Spirit of God. And that's the way he ends that chapter. I thought that was really powerful. I rattled through a lot of it fairly quickly, but I think you would enjoy this book, Made in Our Image, by Stephen Driscoll. He's an Australian writer. And I think that part about identity is so powerful. That's a really good tool to use when we're talking to non-Christians these days. What gives you your identity? Nothing. It has to be created from within. You have to decide. And for a lot of people, it's a lot of pressure, and they don't feel like maybe they got it right. And there are a lot of people desperately trying to find out who they are. And Christianity has an answer for that. Well, I thank you so much for being part of this podcast, and we'll move on to another book next time. All right, thanks. Hope you're having a good day.